A very good evening to you and welcome to this evening's episode of the Watchdog. Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu today detailed how her department is going to manage the reintroduction of the Covid-19 special grant. She says more than 571,000 applications for the 350 Rand social relief grant that have been approved are yet to be collected from the post office. She has urged applicants who have not claimed or received their payments to urgently contact SASSA. Zulu says the applications for the reinstated 350 Rand social relief grant will be open from this coming Friday. People will have to reapply for the grant, she says. She was addressing the media in Pretoria this afternoon. Have a listen to what she had to say.
Noting that COVID-19 is still very much upon us, we will continue with measures to limit face-to-face interactions, to manage social distancing, and use the frontline application system, which has proven to be successful during the initial implementation of this grant. All applications will therefore be again done electronically, as we did before, digitally.
The minister says applicants with unclaimed payments from earlier have until the end of this month to get their cash.
The following frontline application channels may be used. Firstly, through the website, which is srd.sasa.gov.za, through our WhatsApp line, which is 082 046 8553. Additional application channels will be added shortly. An announcement will be made in due course. And we're saying will be made shortly because we want to really give people correct information so that when they try and apply, they don't come back again and say they can't get through.
Well, advocacy groups have actually welcomed the minister's pronouncements, but say it only addresses a small part of what poor and destitute South Africans need right now. We'll be speaking to a whole group of them about what they believe needs to happen next. But first, we are going to speak to the person who is going to run with the management of this process, and that is SASSA's Executive Grants Manager, Diane Dunkley. After her, we will be speaking to those organizations who believe that more needs to be done. They'll tell us the hows and the whens and who must do what. The Watchdog starts now. Well, let's get some clarity on a few issues from the person who's going to run with this process, and that's SASSA Executive Grants Manager, Diane Dunkley. Good evening, Diane. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Now, SASSA, I'm sure, would have known about this even before the president actually announced it. Take us through what you've had to do to prepare not only for the pronouncements that the minister made today, but what's going to happen from Friday when those applications start flowing in.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your listeners, and thank you so much for having us on the show. The announcement by the president, as much as we had previous information to say that it was likely that the grant was coming back, we were caught somewhat by surprise that it came back so soon. But we're extremely happy about that because we do believe that this grant has made a huge difference to the people who have accessed it. So from the time that the president made the announcement on the 25th of July, we've really been working very hard to make sure that we could get everything in place. Because the grant had ended at the end of April, we needed to start and reactivate all the systems that we have to be able to get the applications in again, to be able to process and validate the information, and then obviously to pay the grant as well. So what we've had to do in these 2 weeks that we've had is to go in and get contracts extended. There are a number of contracts that we need to be able to provide this grant, starting with the contract for the actual system that we use for the grant, the contracts obviously for the different payment channels or access channels, and then we also need to negotiate with all of the banks to be able to help us with means testing, as well as the cash send option for people who don't have bank accounts and get the money paid into their mobile phones. We also have to look at contracts for the, or not contracts, sorry, but negotiations with the different government departments to have access to their databases to be able to validate this information. Now, as you'd said at the beginning, the applications are done completely electronically. There are no documents that are provided by the applicants. They provide us the information through the digital channels, and then we need to validate that information with a number of different organizations. The ones that we use in the main are Department of Home Affairs to validate the ID information and the personal details. So it's really important as people apply that they spell their names correctly as it is registered with Home Affairs, that they also give us the information if they're married and have the married surname registered at Home Affairs, that the application is done on that surname and not the maiden surname. So the first validation we do is against Home Affairs. We then check against our own internal social grant system to make sure that the people are not receiving an adult grant. And I need to say that because with this grant, we've actually extended it to include caregivers. So caregivers who receive a child grant as their only income can also apply. They previously were excluded and they've now been included in this iteration of the grant, which is really very, very encouraging. And then we do a number of checks against other databases to confirm whether the applicants are receiving income from any other government source. So UIF, Revenue Services, the National Student Fund, NSFAS. We also need to check whether applicants are in any of the correctional services, whether they're an inmate in any of those institutions, or whether they're in any other institution that is completely funded by government, because then government is already supporting the people. So it's really important that these checks are done so that the people that we do get the grant to are in fact those who don't have any form of financial support and really do deserve the grant. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's really what we've had to do to get ready. And then the payment channels, which is the end, once we've done the validations and confirmed that people qualify, then they can either be paid through a direct deposit into their bank account, or, as I say, if they don't have a bank account, they can choose to be paid by a mobile money transfer to their cell phone. However, the restriction there is that the cell phone has to be registered in their name so that we can have the direct link between the person that we've approved and the person that we're paying. And then the other channel for people who can't use either one of those is through the post office. And we know that a number of challenges were experienced at the beginning with the post office payments, purely because of the numbers of people that had to go to the post office. So one of the things that we've really been working on with the post office and the post bank is to see, for those people who get paid through the post office, whether there are alternative channels that they would be able to go and collect the money using some form of voucher or a virtual voucher, where they could possibly go and cash the money out at an ATM or at various retailers.
But how far have those conversations gone? Because one would have thought that by the time you took a decision that you're going to start this Friday, opening for applications, and then you'll be able to make payments from month end, those conversations would have taken place and specific arrangements would or should be in place by now. Why are you still saying, and I heard the minister saying the same thing, that, that is yet to be, or those conversations are yet to be concluded. Why is that?
They're yet to be concluded. It does not mean that they've not started, and we've really gone a long way with the conversations. The systems have been tested. We are ready to go, and we certainly are ready to accept applications as from Friday. The payments, as Minister had said in her briefing, would start from the end of the month, and we know that by that time the loose ends that we're busy tying up now will in fact be in place. So we're quite confident that we are ready to go from Friday.
Now, there's a heavy, it would seem, reliance on the post office to reach those people in far-flung areas of our country. Now, the challenge that the post office has, as we all know and as we have seen from, the previous rounds, is that not only do they have fewer people, to attend to the clients, hence the long queues we've seen outside post offices right in the middle of a pandemic. But the other challenge that they have is that they have been closing down branches left, right, and center.
I think that that's possibly an overstatement. Yes, they have certainly closed some branches, and those are branches which are in close proximity to other branches or other payment infrastructure. And this is why it is so important for us that we're looking at alternative channels. We agree totally. Those queues that we saw the last time round are unacceptable. They're unacceptable at any time, not just in times of pandemic. But certainly it's a lot worse now in the pandemic when we need to make sure that there is social distancing and that people are safe. So it's one of the major things we've been focusing on is to see how we're able to make payment elsewhere. It's also a concern to us, and we saw this with the first iteration of the grant, is that a number of people do have bank accounts but did not give us that information. So one of the changes we've made, having learned lessons from the initial implementation of the grant, is to ask people for their bank details up front. That means as we're processing the grant, we can verify those details, make sure that the account is linked to that person, it is in their name, and also that it is a current and open account that we'd be able to deposit money into. Obviously, to be able to deposit money into the account is the quickest, the easiest, and the safest way of getting payment to people. But that is also, we need to appreciate that not everybody has a bank account, and there needs to be an alternative for those people that don't have bank accounts. And that is where our partnership with the Post Office comes in very strongly.
Now, we know for a fact that, because it has happened before, that there will be challenges with the process. There was mention of an appeals process. Take us through that particular process.
Thank you so much, Vuyo. Yes, with anything where you deal with these kind of numbers, you can expect to experience challenges, and what we need to do is to find solutions to those. One of the lessons that we've learned from the previous iteration of the grant is that the communication, particularly around the appeals process, was not as good as it should be. Now, we're really wanting to stress that everybody who applies for this grant, they will apply once, but the grant is validated every single month as if it were a new grant. And this is done to make sure that where circumstances change, we're able to stop the payment of the grant, and that we really do target those who need the money the most. Anybody, though, whose grant is declined, and remembering that as we do the validations, we depend on the veracity of the information we're able to get from other government departments. And we have found that there are challenges with that, but certainly we use the most current and most updated information that we're able to source from the other departments. But should somebody be declined and they say, but I really do not have any other income, I don't get support from anybody else, I don't have any ways of supporting myself, they then have the right to request us to reconsider our decision. The outcome of the application is placed on the website on the SRD system as soon as a decision is made. Any person whose application is declined, because they're able to go and check that the outcome both on the WhatsApp as well as on the website, the minute they see that they're declined, if they know that they actually do qualify for the grant, should then immediately on that system log an application for reconsideration. We will then reconsider against updated databases, but the other step that we do when we do the reconsideration is that we will then check with the banks. We will do a proxy means test with the banks to be able to see if there is any inflow into their bank accounts. If there is an inflow, and it doesn't matter from what source that inflow into the bank account is, if there is inflow that is detected that is more than 595 Rand a month, then it will disqualify them. And this is a huge improvement on the previous iteration of the grant, because the previous grant said if you had any inflow into your account, a more than zero. So even a 50 Rand donation from one of your members of your family or something like that would disqualify you from getting the grant. We've now brought in the means test threshold at the food poverty line, so that if somebody has, gets support from another source that is below the 595, then clearly they do not have sufficient income to be able to support themselves with food for a month, and then they will still qualify for the grant. So that really is a big improvement.
Was that the main reason for rejecting most of the applications the last time? That people were getting, monies monthly from relatives or friends and that kind of thing? Was that the main reason?
That was one of the reasons. However, it wasn't the main reason.
What were the others?
There were a number of reasons that people were declined from getting the grant, mostly because their ID was found on another database, which and the majority of them was that they actually received UIF benefits or the Temporary Employees Relief Scheme, the TERS benefit, or that they were registered and therefore could qualify for those benefits should they have lost their job. So those were the majority of the declines. There were also people who applied who were on the NSFAS database, which meant that they were getting a stipend, even if, as being a student. And then there were people who were also receiving social grants who applied for the 350 grant, and they were declined because already they were being supported by the state. So those were the three major reasons why people were declined. And then obviously, as we did the reconsideration, it was on the means test that there was an inflow found into their bank accounts.
Now from the previous rounds, there's now this 116, if I got it correctly, 1,000 still awaiting collections. Now, what happens there? What's going to happen there?
Okay, people who are still owed money from the first round of the grant will get their money. However, we are concerned because there are about 116,000 people who have not yet collected their grants that have been approved and sent to the post office for payment. It's a total of 571,000 grants that have not been collected. And you can understand that the number of grants would be more than the number of beneficiaries, because one beneficiary could possibly not have collected grant for 3 or 4 or 5 months. Those monies need to be collected before the end of August. And we have sent notifications to everybody who is in that category to remind them that their money is available for them at the post office and they do need to collect it. If they do not collect it by the 31st of August, that money will revert to the state. Okay, because we do have to have a cutoff.
But these are people who applied and were approved. In other words, no new applicants, or someone cannot come and say, oh, well, I was rejected, but I still think that I qualified, and so you need to give me a bit of, shall we call it, back pay. That's not the case.
Yeah, no, that's not the case. These are people who applied when the application was open, so they applied before the 30th of April. They were approved because they met all the criteria, and the funds were sent and deposited into an account at the post office for them. They have just not collected their funds. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. One of them being that when we started paying the grant, we did not necessarily have all the databases in place that we needed. One of the databases that we only got as we'd started moving along the process was the database from correctional services for all the inmates. We did find that there were some who managed to get an application lodged, whether somebody else did it on their behalf or whether they have a cell phone in prison is that I'm not going to be able to answer. But they were able to put in an application. However, because they needed to go and collect the money in person, they were not able to do so. And we know that some of the uncollected money belongs to that category. And that certainly will come back to the state. But there are other genuine applicants who have not collected their money. We have sent them all SMS notifications to remind them that the money is there and that it must be collected before the end of August.
Now, speaking of inmates, and added to that, there were several other categories like public servants who were working but managed to, claim. Now, how far have you gone in building in ensuring that such things never ever happen again? How far have you gone in ensuring that the system now has a great deal of integrity?
Vuya, what we have done is to get updated databases, and that includes information from the government employees' salary system, as well as the salary system for the soldiers and the policemen, as well as the information from the government employees' pension fund. And we really do believe that that would help us identify civil servants who do try and make application and that they won't get paid. It is indeed true that 241 civil servants did receive the money in the last round of the grant. For those ones, they've all been reported to the departments that employ them, because obviously SASSA cannot take disciplinary action against them, but we feel very strongly that there should be action taken against them, and therefore we have notified their departments, and their departments will deal with it. We also are working with the Department of Public Service and Administration, DPSA, to let them know which of the public servants had applied, so that from their side they can also assist us in making sure that the matters are attended to. However, as I say, we've got the updated databases. We have made arrangements to get refreshed databases a lot more frequently than we did last year, and we do believe that this will help us make way more accurate decisions and make sure that we are able to give the grant to people who do qualify for it.
Okay. Diane Dankali, thanks very much for your time. She is SASSA's Executive Grants Manager, the person who's going to be running with this process from now on. Now, while social development advocacy groups have welcomed the grants reintroduction, they say it only addresses a very small part of what the poor and destitute need right now. Up next, we talk to a group of them about how they hope to up the ante and take their struggle to new heights. The Watchdog continues right after this. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. Social Development Minister Lindy Wezulu this afternoon took journalists through the criteria recipients will have to meet to qualify for the special COVID-19 grant. Now, let's get views of several organizations that strongly advocated for this grant and get some clarity on not only how they feel, but what they hope to do next, because many of them have been saying the COVID, this relief grant is only the beginning. Some have gone as far as to say it should be extended, until the country adopts a basic income grant. Good evening to all three of you, and thanks very much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Tiny. Your organization, together with the Black Sash and several other organizations, have been saying this should only be a start. What should happen is that it should be extended up until the country adopts a basic income grant.
Yes, good evening. I don't even know where to start. Yeah, but first and foremost, when I look at this grant, to tell the honest fact, it's like it's another way of oppressing people. It's another way of oppressing our children. As a mother, as a granny, I'm getting paid this. Imagine getting paid $350. What am I going to do with that money? What am I going to do seriously with $350? You look at the food increase at this time and age of COVID-19. Everything is going haywire. You look at your children who goes to school, spend time, in varsity. At the end of the day, they are getting paid this peanuts. It's not going to take us anywhere. The problem is with this grant, first and foremost, it's like the way we are oppressed, we poor people. We are not even allowed to shout. We are not even allowed to complain into saying, but this is not right. What am I going to do with 350? Because a bag of milli, it's more than 100 and something. So, and then what next? These are the problems that we're facing. I was like looking at paraffin. I went to go and buy paraffin today. It has skyrocketed in such a way, So we are having that problem into saying, how can it be? Why can't this government increase this money? To tell the honest fact, because 350, it's like, it's from hand to mouth. At the end of the day, you don't have food at all. It's, I am always saying to myself, with this 350, this government does not see that it's raising another army, an army of young children.
Okay, we'll hope to reestablish that line. But Busisibeko, you did hear what Tiny had to say just now. And I know that your organization has crunched some numbers. It took a whole year for you to do that exercise. And what we keep on hearing from the government is that there is simply no money, and you think there are ways or there are places where this money can be found.
We've lost you.
Busi?
Can I go?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So at the Institute for Economic Justice, we've been conducting some research, like it already indicated over the last year, to basically say government can afford to basically give people, extend the SRG to at least the food poverty line. And in fact, that should pave way in the medium term into universal basic income grants that would be at least either at the upper bound poverty line. And we've shown that there are many ways that the revenue can be raised, including right now South Africa is having a favorable commodity cycle, which means that we are getting more profits from our commodities. And so why not introduce, for example, a resource rent tax, which would mean that after a certain level of profitability for these commodities companies, that an extra tax kicks in, because fundamentally the commodities are the wealth of the nation, and it is important that we redistribute that wealth that is being generated from the nation's resources to the people of this country. But also not just that, we've spoken about a social solidarity tax, or social security tax that could be implemented for those with higher incomes. What is needed in South Africa is a radical redistribution of resources. We're seeing the deep inequality, and we can't say we can't afford it. It's about creating the physical space, which government is able to do, but they have to choose to do so. And there are many avenues that we put forward for that.
Well, I can hear a business person saying, but when you are granted, mineral rights, you know exactly what you're signing up for. You can't then, after the fact, start demanding more. What would be your answer to that?
I mean, really, it's again this issue of South Africa is not a viable society for the majority, and business can decide not to engage in this radical redistribution of wealth, but it's to their own peril, right? The economy is made up of real individuals, of human beings who work in their businesses. We know, for example, that more than half of working South Africans are earning below the working poverty line. And that is, that is critical to understand. We must understand the whole ecosystem of inequality in our country, and not just looking at grants as a sort of like the problem, but to understand that grants are a symptom of the larger inequality between business, between workers, between the economy and the system itself. And that's a very different way of understanding. And business has to take part. They have to give something fundamentally for our economy to be viable.
Thembinkosi, isn't the problem, or doesn't the problem start with what we have become accustomed to as a country as a way of going about putting together our budget? Isn't that where the problem starts?
Yes, good evening, and thanks for having us. Indeed, we do think that some of the challenges that are facing South Africa today has to do with the way that the budget is formulated. One of the things that we observe, obviously, is that South Africa is increasingly becoming indebted, which means of the money that is collected in the form of revenue, a lot of it still has to go out to service the debt that has been accumulated over the years. Secondly, because of the way that the money is distributed along the three tiers of government, it becomes difficult for government at the central level via SASSA to be able to substantially increase the grant to the levels as proposed by the civil society players, who are calling for an increase to at least the food poverty line of 585 rands, which is quite very likely, as Tiny was saying, because the cost of living has escalated and things has become increasingly difficult under the COVID scenario of a lot of restrictions, lockdown, and escalating food prices. In Oxfam, we also did research which indicated that about half of South Africa's population frequently go hungry. And as a result of this hunger, we have increasing cases of malnutrition among the children of South Africa. So this issue of the grant is an important element where focus needs to be made to ensure that in a few years' time, or the introduction of a basic income grant is being put and the fiscal space is made in the budget to be able to allow that, as Bosi was saying.
A tiny, in the ideal world, what makes sense, from the point of view of a person, let's say a household that has 2-3 children, any idea where, you think this basic income grant should perhaps start at for those families to be able to afford the basics?
At least 1.2, because to tell the honest fact, sometimes we are talking even about people above 40. Where are you going to get a job? Where are you going to find a job? We are talking about people at my age. Where am I going to find a job? If I am to 350 won't cater at all for anything inside the house. So what I was thinking about is at least let it increase into 100 to 1.2. At least maybe it might cover somewhere and there, because seriously, to tell the honest fact, everything is going higher each and every day. And at this time of COVID, we at home, we are locked down. Kids want food each and every time. They come back, Gogo, we want this, Gogo, we want that. It's so frustrating. And with our children that we stay with at our homes, children who went to school, they look up to you as a mother. 350 is nothing. They can't even buy a roll-on. It's very, very frustrating. I mean, 350, it's like they are poor will become poorer and richer will become richer. Because to tell the honest fact, if I was always saying to myself, okay, fine, 350 is here. But now at the same time, it's like it's another way of sabotaging funds by throwing 350s at everyone around here. But the most important thing with me as I was saying, instead of 350, why can't this government create jobs? If you can't create jobs, we can never live on 350. This money must be increased. No Maganjan, this money must be increased. It's too little for us to tell the honest fact. Everything is so high. At this time and age of this mayhem that just occurred, the looting, I must board in a taxi in order with me to go and buy food. So how am I going to 350 won't cater for anything at all? We are going to be poor and poorer and poorer and poorer. And this is raising another GBV because whereby there's hunger, there's always angriness, there's always, fighting, it raises, I don't even know how to put this, but 350 to tell the honest fact, it's an insult. Mm-hmm. And it's like with us, black and poor, you don't have to voice it out into saying, but this 350, it's not enough. We are told. It's like it's government by the people. It's government by the people. It's like it's people by the government. We listen to the government. The government just patch out the constitution. We must listen to the government. We can't voice our grievances because the minute you voice your grievances, you are the inciter of violence. But to tell the honest fact, these 350s are not enough at all. They are creating more poverty, they are creating more crime, they are creating, seriously, this is so frustrating to tell the honest fact. With people who live in shacks whereby there's no electricity, it's worse.
Okay. Now,
Thank you.
Since you guys, your organization has done a bit of number crunching, where have you put the minimum for a basic income grant to make sense? Just unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Okay.
But our current calculations, like I said earlier, begins with an extension of the currently existing grants, which would include caregivers, which SASSA has rightfully done now, to 585 Rand in the short term, but say that in the medium term to develop it to at least the 1.2 that Tiny is talking about, which is the upper bound poverty line. But of course, in the longer term, it would have to be increased. I mean, I think I was reflecting on this idea that, SASSA is validating your account every month to figure out if you are getting income that is equivalent to, to the food poverty line now, but before it was 0 Rand. And I was just thinking that it really does not take into account the diverse strategies that households take for survival, right? It's not assessing how many people are in that household, how many people actually need that support. It might be that the person receiving the money in their account, is taking care of multiple children who may or may not have access to grants. And so in a way, it is biased against the ways in which households function, or there's a lack of understanding of the ways in which households really survive. And we have to take that seriously in our considerations of what would be a fair basic income grant in the long term, but also to echo Tiny's comments to say that we really need job creation, right? So fundamentally to understand that a youth big or the existing grants are not a silver bullet to all of South Africa's problems, and that, this is one part of a larger macroeconomic restructuring and transformation that is still needed. And so it is important that we continuously take the government that this is part of the solution.
Well, we often hear people saying, well, the government doesn't create jobs, really. They merely facilitate the process of other people creating jobs. What do you say to that?
I mean, I think we've seen around the world, and there's great research that shows how extended public work programs are critical to economies. I mean, you can look to Argentina and India. That's some of the examples that we've seen, which are guaranteed to say that in the event that private sector is not generating the jobs needed, that government can step in and become the employer of last resort, particularly during crisis levels. It doesn't mean government has to employ these people forever, but it can be for a period of time, like they did in Argentina after their crisis. Government employed people, and these people gained skills and were then in the future absorbed into the private sector when the economy began to recover. So I think there is certainly more scope for our policy to do more. We've got the public employment program, the presidential one, and to think about that 100 billion that was announced, only 12.6 billion of that was actually allocated in our budget last year, which tells you a lot, about the priority of job creation and protection. Just allocate that full amount, allocate it to the presidential employment stimulus plan. Make sure that more people are being absorbed during this time. Retrain people, upskill people, and we've certainly written about this as well at the Institute.
Tim Gossi, I mean, I think this was last week, the finance minister did hint at how not so chuffed he was about just giving money to the poor, that perhaps they should be doing something in return. I'm keen to know what your thoughts are around that particular issue.
Yes, thank you. That's very important. I mean, the economic theory suggests that if you give people free money, even where there is an opportunity to do some work to get money, they would not want to take up that opportunity. However, as Busi was saying, it is about the government to create those public works programs, kind of facilities for people who are unemployed to start engaging in some important economic activity that contributes to society overall. It goes beyond just the money that they get from that process. It's also about the feeling of being worthy and doing something important to help your fellow South Africans, as it were. So it becomes important that the government at this point designs appropriate programs to be able to absorb some of those unemployed people into some economic activity. One of the suggestions that we have put forward, obviously, is the question of green economic recovery. To say when we are having those economic recovery plans for COVID-19, let us look at the question of climate justice, climate change, about how we can look at the new energy mix, going renewables, empowering people with skills to feed your renewable energy sources like solar panels, and maintaining those systems in their own communities so that they can at the same time address the question of energy poverty, improve their skills, and also earn an income, and also control to some extent the amount that households, especially poor households, pay towards electricity. Because it's about an income problem, but at some point you need to also think about how do you reduce the costs that are applicable to households, especially indigent households.
Tiny, I want to know how you see us getting to the stage or stages that all of you are talking about that will hopefully give us the kind of result that we are all looking for. And because, I mean, from my observation is that it's not just about, government versus business versus labor versus civil society. One senses a great deal of frustration from within each of these big groups. I listened to the finance minister last week. The frustration was coming out that, he wasn't too happy with the demands that some of his own colleagues, make on Treasury and on the fiscus. When one listens to all the partners at NEDLAC, you can see how people at times are pulling in different directions. Where is the center? How do we try to find one another pretty quickly so that we are able to put all these ideas on the table?
Hey, in terms of our government, I just said earlier on that with poor people, it's like as if their voice are not heard. They are being oppressed each and every time. A minute you raise your voice, you're inciting violence, something like that. We've been trying to voice our grievances with the government, but we are not heard at all. Somebody else just spoke about creating jobs. Each and every time when I think of these 350s, I'm always asking myself, because, our government must open eyes into saying, I'm sorry to jump in that, because we're talking about 350s. We have about something like 6,000 mine dams in Gauteng only that are abandoned. If those mine dams can be rehabilitated, a lot of people will find jobs. Those mine dams can create a lot of jobs.
Let me ask you something here, and I'm not being, well, if I am controversial for the sake of being controversial here. But civil society has people who sit at NEDLEC on a regular basis to talk about these issues. Yeah. Do you think perhaps they're not doing what they're supposed to do? Or that perhaps they come across, taller and more solid walls that they can't easily penetrate? Have you been able, as an activist on the ground, have you been able to find out why your fellow comrades who represent civil society at such an important forum as NEDLEC aren't able to push through the ideas that you are talking about? You've just made an example about mine dams. Why aren't those kinds of proposals making it to, making it like not being heard where it matters?
In terms of that, I just want to start with the government itself, to tell the honest fact, because I've been interviewed by various sectors of the government in terms of that, especially the DMR. And I was asking the DMR into saying, here are the mine dams. Can you please rehabilitate them? And I know very well that starting from scientists up until hard labor, everyone is going to get jobs. And with my organization, the organizations that I'm working with, we've been voicing that grievances into saying, rehabilitate these mine dams, clean our rivers. We have engineers, children who went to school as engineers. Our rivers are dirty today. They can create jobs. Those rivers can create jobs. But it's like we are talking to deaf ears. Our government is so pig-headed in such a way that he can't even see. I mean, I'm always saying, I'm serving a blind government. I mean, this can create jobs. Instead of giving our children 350, create jobs with that money. Let our children feel you're important. If one wakes up in the morning and go to work, those people feel, they walked all down the street. But now if you are to be given 350, it's like you're creating cops, working cops, So that 350, it's really deforming our children. There's a lot that our government can do in order to create jobs for our children. It doesn't mean that our children want this grant money. It's because they don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. That is why I'm settling for this freaking less. That is why I said, at least let this money be increased, to tell the honest truth, because it doesn't cater for anything at all. It doesn't cater, it doesn't buy anything. We are becoming poorer and poorer and poorer, and we are being hard-pressed at the same time by this government because we are not supposed to complain. You get this, it's fine. I remember it was last year, roaming around all the pay points. I'm talking about the post office. You come across people who are saying to you, I've applied this money 6 months ago. I haven't get even a cent up until today. Where does that money goes? It frustrates people. It's like, this government is playing mind games with poor poor people, seriously, to tell the honest fact. We've been pushing and mandating to saying, let these mine dams be rehabilitated. Who's going to work there? Our children. Let our rivers be cleaned. Who's going to work there? Our children. Create jobs instead of creating, destroying our children into being working costs. What are you going to do with 350 to tell the honest fact? There's nothing that you can buy with 350. Thank you.
Busisibeko, something I put my finger on is whether this information doesn't get put in front of those who have the power to take decisions, or whether deliberately or for whatever other reason they choose to look the other way, or to ignore what gets put before them. What is it?
Yeah, I'd say it's mostly the latter. And I heard you ask that question earlier around, NEDLAC and why these issues aren't being raised. As somebody who's been in NEDLAC myself, that these issues are certainly raised. In fact, some of the issues that are being discussed in a public arena have been raised numerous times in NEDLAC, including emergency rescue measures that were continuously needed throughout this crisis itself. And in fact, I know that it was labor unions who were very set on what needed to happen after the looting, what kind of responses were needed. So I think fundamentally the problem is that we're fighting against a dominant economic discourse where there is a particular ideology that's been adopted. And it doesn't matter that Lucy goes and produces tons and tons of evidence that counters the dominant thinking, because the dominant thinking wins and because Lucy doesn't have the power. So I wanted to really emphasize this idea of, who has the power, what is the political settlement, and what does it take to change and shift that? I mean, civil society has been advocating for the last 2-3 decades towards meaningful participation in budgets, saying, we need an end to austerity, and all these different things for over 2 decades, yet here we sit. And civil society hasn't been able to meaningfully engage with parliament and government to really shape the budgets of this country. So I do think it is a power differential issue that we have to really face and challenge in our country. It's unfortunate that it is only when people stand up in the masses, when catastrophe happens, that people are heard. It's really, really unfortunate because there's so much wealth of knowledge that could be, harnessed without having to get to those extremes.
Tim goes to seriously run out of time, but I have to give you the remaining seconds. Especially because your organization at Footprints across the continent and the world. How have people dealt with this? What do we do? How do we go forward now? Quickly, 10 seconds.
I think the issue is the democracy deficit, the way that it seems decisions are made at the top without really consulting the people down the line. The NEDLAC, to some extent, is failed because it seems the people who represent the community constituency, they account to themselves. So they don't come back to the people to report an account and seek a proper mandate.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it.